All right, welcome back. In the last video, what we looked at building was user sign-in capability. And what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how can we actually use that sign-in capability to validate a user and open a session. And when a session's open, we're going to enable certain things, and when the person's logged out, we're going to disable things. So on this screen here, if they're logged in, they're going to be able to add a new album, and they're going to see the edit and delete columns. If they're not logged in, they'll be able to navigate to this page, but they're not going to see these elements. Okay, all they'll be able to see is the albums. It's just sort of like a read-only type of a view if they're not logged in. So let's take a look at what we had in our database. So if I look at users, we had this idea of an email and a hashed password. This was sort of a little test that I did just to make sure that our inserts were working correctly. But here's actually logging in as a user. So let's go to our code here now in PHP Storm. And after we've registered our user, we want to go to a login page. Okay. Now right now we don't actually have a login page. So if we go to register a new user, okay, what happens is we registered the user, but now when we go to the login page, it's not here. So we need to create this page. So I'm going to go into my PHP Storm here, and I'm going to say new, and PHP file, and it's a login page. And on a typical login page, we're going to have, we're basically going to have a little form that's got username and password. That's the typical login page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my bootstrap information over. Let's go to a file that has it. There we go. Copy. And we'll see in a later video how all of this is just going to be incorporated into a file called header.php. But for now, I'm just going to move it all around manually. Similarly, in the future, we're going to have something called footer that is going to include all these files in our footer for us, so we don't have to keep copying and pasting them all over the place. Okay, so let's create some main links here, and we'll say class equals container, and that just sort of moves things in a little bit of style, and then put in our header. So there's our login screen. So even now, if I go to refresh, it looks a lot better, right? So now it says login, here. Okay. So actually, before we can even, well, let's build our login page. I was thinking of how we're going to validate, but we'll build this page first. So let's start with PHP. And we're going to we'll just echo out for now, just a little div. And I'm doing it as an echo instead of just straight HTML, because what we're going to do is in the future we're going to be modifying this, and we'll have to make a decision based on whether or not the person gave us valid login credentials. So I'm going to say ID equals message. So this allows us to refer to this div in the future. Let's put the closing div here before I forget. Please log in. There we go. Please log into your account. I have this incredibly zoomed in right now. Maybe I'll just make this a more realistic size. So even if I hit save at this point, go back, and here's what we've got. It just looks nice. And this container piece here, with that, save. You can see how there's some nice spaces on the side. If I remove that, see how it stretches right out? It looks a little a little bit awkward. Oops. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to build a form here. So it's going to look like every other form that we've built on this site so far. And our method is going to be post. And our action. So where do we want to navigate to? We're going to navigate to a page called validate.php. And what this page is going to do is it's going to do the actual database access to confirm if indeed our user is valid. And if they are valid, it'll take us to the albums page logged in. If they're not valid, it's going to redirect us back to this login page with an error message. So put in our field set, and as with everything, we have a label, and we have a label, and we have an input. Okay, so for the label, actually we can do it all in one line. Here, it's going to be email. Okay, that's going to be our label. And let's put some information in for it. So I'm going to say the name for this thing is email. And I'll add in the style stuff in a moment. So name equals email, ID equals email, and it's required. And the type is also equal to email. And we'll put some placeholder text. It says email@email.com. Hit save. So here we have a label and an input. I go back and I refresh my screen. So here we have our label, and here's our input. And you can see the placeholder is in there as well. Okay, so copy this, I'll paste. Now the next one is a password. And we're going to get rid of, oops. The type here is also password, and this is important because if we leave this bit out, so let me just leave this out for now and see what happens. Okay, and change our label to be password. Hit save. Go in and we refresh. A couple things. First off, these aren't really lining up too nicely, and the spacing is really tight. So we have some styling we can do. But if I typing in here, I can see my password. Well, that's no good. So in here, if I say type equals password, hit save. Now when I refresh, see how it's dotted out for me? Now the other things we wanted to do were for some styling. So on our label, let's add in a class, column SM1. And what this will do is it'll give it consistent spacing, right? So it'll make these labels exactly one column wide. Hit save. Now if I hit refresh, now it looks a little bit better. These at least line up. And I want to put a little spacing vertically in here. So I can handle that at the field set level. Here I'm going to say class equals form group. So copy that. Put it in both field sets. Hit refresh. Okay, so now it spaces things out a little bit and a little bit nicer for our eyes. Okay, so let's now build our validate form, right? So, there's one big thing missing, no button. So down here, let's add a button. And let's call this login. Save. Okay, there's our button. It's kind of ugly. It doesn't have the nice round corners or the 3D stuff, and it's really should be lined up with our other inputs. So we can handle that by saying class equals, and in here we give it a button class. So that's going to give us the rounded corners. And if I say it's button.success, that's going to make it green with a little bit of shading. And if I do one more, if I say column SM offset 1, that means move it over one column. Save, refresh. Now it looks good. Okay, so now when we push that button, it's going to add email and password to our post array, and it's going to go to the validate.php page. So we don't have that page yet, so it should be a 404. If I say log in, it moves to this page, but it's a 404. All right, so far everything's working as expected. So we'll add in a new PHP file and call it validate. The user actually will never really see this screen. It happens so fast. So we don't need any styling or anything on it. So it's going to be all done basically in code. So we got our email, and I'm going to access the post array and look for the email. Okay, so again, that comes from here. We named it email. So this post array will have a field called email in it that we can access. Okay, that's what this is. That's the post array. The position is email. And then the next one is password. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to do is we need to connect to the database. So step 1, connect to the database. All right, create SQL query. Step 3, prepare, execute query. Okay, so we've got our basic 5-step process here. So step 1, we'll create a connection. Okay, hit save. And then step 2, we're going to create our query. So here, our SQL. What we need from our user is basically, we need their password. We need to validate if their password is correct. So what I'm going to ask for is their email and their password. Whoops. I don't really need their email, but I guess better safe than sorry. And then we're going to prepare and execute. So command. And then we're going to take our command and we're going to bind the parameters. And let's see, what did I make the length of the email? I made it 120. Okay, now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to store the user information. So I'm going to say command fetch. Okay, so here we have, we connected to our database, we've written our SQL, here we've prepared it to prevent the SQL injection attack. We execute the actual command, which is the same as going into something like a Workbench, you know, running a command and then hitting the little execute lightning bolt. And now this user variable stores the user information. And here's where we're going to do the validation. So we're going to say if, and there's a method called password verify, and it takes in the password of our user that we received, whatever they typed in, and then we have our user passwords. This is what's returned from the database. So if that evaluates to be true, then we're going to do something called session start. And that starts a session on the server itself, so that we can set variables for the user. So now you can see there's an array called session, and we'll say the user ID is equal to, actually, let's keep the naming consistent. Session email, let's call it email, equals user email. We can also bring in like a username and other things for the future, but for now, let's just let's get that working. And then what we'll do is we'll redirect. So I'm going to say header location albums.php. Okay. Now, if it didn't work, if their login didn't work, what I want to do is I want to basically, I'm going to redirect back to that login page. But this time, when I'm going to add in a little query string at the end here, and I'm going to say invalid equals true. Now you can kind of make up whatever you want this invalid. You can say, you can call this whatever you want. Like you can say, you know, password invalid or equals true or anything like that. Bottom line is you put in a question mark and then you can assign a value to a variable right after this. So I'm going to hit save. So let's give this a try and see what happens. So let's go back to our login here. Try to log in. Now it went to the validate page and the information I put in was obviously incorrect, and it came back here. It says invalid equals true. Now what it didn't do is really what I want is I want to update this to say, you know, the username or password was not correct, and I'm going to change this from blue to red so that it's more obvious that something went wrong. So to do that, in my login page, remember up here at the top, I said we'll echo this. We'll do this inside of PHP. Now I can say if not empty, and remember when something's up here in the query string, that's the get array. Okay, so I can say get invalid. Okay, so if invalid is not empty, meaning there is something up there, then what I want to do is I want to echo, and I'm going to echo the same command, the same div, but this time I'm going to change the styling to say danger, and here I'm going to say your password was incorrect. Else, I'll just paste this in here. We'll set up a div, and in here, instead of being danger, we'll have the alert info box. And you'll see we keep this message equals ID the same, because then we can actually use JavaScript and whatnot to work with this div. Okay, so there we have it. Let's test it out. right, so let's go to our registration page. So we'll put in a new user. Hit save, and I go to log in, and it brings me into this view here. Now, if I take the exact same URL where I'm not logged in a different browser, you can see I'm not seeing the credentials of someone who's logged in, right? So I can't edit or delete, I can't add a new album, but here, where I'm logged in, I can do that. So in our next video, what we'll do is we'll start building some navigation across the top here so that we can show our user in our session, and we'll include the ability to log out for a user. All right, cheers.